MAID that's an acronym for Medical Assistance in Dying in Canada. They wrapped it up in this nice sounding word, so nobody really knows what it is. I didn't know what it was until 5 days before my mom chose to end her life with medical assistance in dying. So medical assistance in dying became legal in Canada in 2016. And at the time, it was for people who were terminal. So they were suffering from a terminal illness and they had to be facing imminent death in order to be able to access it.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to Something for Everybody. My name is Aaron Machbitz. Alicia, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. First and most important question is, how are you doing? Like, actually, for real, how are you doing?
It's kind of a day-by-day question. Generally, I'm great, I think, considering everything that's been going on. It's been a journey. It's been a journey for the last few years, and a lot of healing's been happening. So today I'm good.
Beautiful. Well, before we get into it, I just want to say, like, as you stated, I know you've been going through it the last couple years. Sorry that you've been dealt that hand, but also thankful that you sort of stepped up to the plate and are trying to make a difference on this thing that's going on in your country. Not in my country yet, but if it can happen there, it can happen anywhere. So I think that's why the conversation is so extremely important. And it basically boils down to how much is a human life worth? And I think a fucking lot. So, and as do you. So let's start with just what is MAID, and when did inception start in Canada?
So MAID that's an acronym for Medical Assistance in Dying in Canada. They wrapped it up in this nice sounding word, so nobody really knows what it is. I didn't know what it was until 5 days before my mom chose to end her life with medical assistance in dying. So medical assistance in dying became legal in Canada in 2016. And at the time, it was for people who were terminal. So they were suffering from a terminal illness and they had to be facing imminent death in order to be able to access it. And it was quite difficult initially. Fast forward to 2021, that law was challenged. So a person who was not facing imminent death, who was not terminal, they challenged the law. A judge approved it. And what we now know is the initial expansion. So think people who have multiple sclerosis. So they're not dying imminently, but they will eventually die from this and they are suffering. And so anyway, it just expanded beyond that. The end of 2021, my mom accessed MAID, and it was through that second track, they call them. So the original iteration of it was track 1. Now they've expanded it to track 2. So that's how my mom was able to access it and how I learned what it was.
So anyone can just go in and say, I want to enact MAID, or it has to be, there's certain protocols that you have to pass, or there's certain things that need to be checked, or what's the situation there?
Yeah, so there are safeguards that are put in place to ensure that people aren't just walking in off of the streets. Ironically, that's exactly what's been happening. So the safeguards that have been put in place, in my opinion, are insufficient. They are inadequate, and vulnerable people are dying because of it. So, for example, if you have a condition that is incurable and you find to be intolerable to you, you can now access medical assistance in dying. So you can imagine how many people can fit into that category. There was a man in Chilliwack who accessed MAID because he was deaf. He had hearing loss. It was listed as the only item on his application for his approval because it is an incurable condition that he found to be intolerable to him. He also suffered from clinical depression for decades. But that's the loophole. You see people who now have type 2 diabetes can access it. And the Canadian government is looking to expand it even further to include people with mental illness alone and children to the age of 12 with parental consent. That was supposed to become law in Canada in 2023, March 17th. And because of the advocacy work that my sister and I are doing, along with thousands of others, they postponed it to this year, 2024. And we did not stop. We were relentless. And now the current government has postponed that to 2027. So March 17th, 2027, as we stand now, people with mental illness alone, so think depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, will be able to access medical assistance in dying in Canada.
That part right there, when I was listening to you talk with Kelsey, that was the part this whole thing makes me want to talk to you, but that strikes a chord with me for a very specific reason, because I lost my sister to suicide in 2018. And like, people who are at that sort of brink are not, like, for the most part, are not wanting to die. They are wanting the pain to end. So those are two totally separate things. And so walking into a place and saying, I want to die, well, that's not really necessarily true. But if you're just taking it at their word, for someone who's dealing with all sorts of issues, my sister, schizophrenic, bipolar disorder, severe depression, obviously not in a clear state of mind to make rational decisions about her future, hence why she took her own life, that can't be something that is tolerated or allowed. First, there has to be so many other measures that need to be taken for that person to potentially get the help they need, deserve, or maybe they can't afford it. But that also is another question of, like, okay, get them the help that they need. And so that's really quite frightening.
I mean, it's terrifying, as a mom to an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old. I think about, the hard times that I went through as a teenager, and, your first breakup and, the hard things in life. And my goodness, I remember, at times just thinking, like, it would just be so much easier if this all ended. And imagine in that weakened state, you went to a hospital and someone said, we can do that.
Mm.
I've had moms reach out to me and say, I suffered so severely from postpartum depression for years after I had my baby. And if someone had offered me MAID, I would have accepted it and I would not be here for my child. And I think that's some of the biggest arguments that the psychiatrists that are coming forward and speaking to the House of Commons, which is kind of our high level government here in Canada. And what my sister and I also said to the House of Commons when we had the opportunity to speak to them a couple of years ago is that it's a toss up. It's a 50-50. That's almost the exact stat, a 50-50, whether or not you can be cured from a mental illness. That's not good enough. So 50% of the people that we're looking at killing can be cured and would go on to be cured and live a healthy, happy life. And I mean, we can jump into another topic here, but I really don't think that when we have alternative therapies such as MDMA and psilocybin and ketamine and, we can just go into all of the plant medicines, really, that these are illegal. Many of them are illegal. And so we're not even tapping into these, but we can die. We can die more easily than we can see a specialist in Canada. It takes 18 to 24 months to see a specialist, but you can die within 24 hours in Canada under medical assistance in dying.
Wow. Yeah, like, I think about, obviously, my sister, like, initially when she got, diagnosed and, the worst of it was at the very, very, very beginning. What if she had just went in and said, I'm ready for this to be over? She would have lost the next 11 years of her life, where many, many great things happened for her despite having struggled with all these things, graduated from college, got a job, all these sorts of cool things that people do when they are able to see the value of life. Like, I can't imagine that it would have been over 11 years earlier. And then the wake of suicide is catastrophic that no one really thinks to think about. Like I live with it every day as you do, right? It doesn't just like, oh, that person is gone now. I'm like, it's all good. Fuck that shit. It doesn't happen ever. Like it never goes away. And so we have to put an emphasis on obviously proactive medicine, preventative care, all of these other modalities that real psychiatrists who are doing these extensive studies have saying that there is a cure now. Not, they don't use that word specifically, but there's a better way to think about mental health, mental illness, and things that we can do about it. And so again, like you said, like a young person, I coach young baseball players and they have rough days all of the time. Again, girlfriend breaks up with them. They get a bad grade. They don't get invited to the party, right? All of these things, a sense of belonging is destroyed at a young age because we're just not sure how to handle it. So I can just go to this place and be like, having a rough day. Don't feel like living anymore.
Yeah.
And then who go ahead.
I would say this is happening all the time. You know, there was a woman recently, it was in the news in Canada, in Vancouver. She went to Vancouver General Hospital. She is working towards becoming a therapist, a counselor, and she struggles from suicidal ideation. She went to the hospital because she wanted help and they offered her MAID.
She asked for help and that's what they gave her.
She asked for help. I don't understand how it can be both in Canada. We have the government spends millions of dollars on suicide prevention. And then they are also pushing medical assistance in dying. And I don't understand how you can promote both. Because like you said, people accessing MAID because out of desperation, you know, is very different than a person who wants to die with dignity. This is what they call it in Canada. There's actually a huge organization calling Death with Dignity, and they are one of the biggest organizations that are pushing this because they say it's a dignified death. And there's nothing dignified about the way that my mom died. There's nothing dignified about the homeless people who are accessing MAID. There's nothing dignified about the people who have disabilities, who can't afford to live in our country because our disability services are so terrible that they are choosing homelessness or death. That's their choice. They don't want to die. And they're saying, to be clear, I don't want to die, but I would rather be dead than be homeless. We're pushing it on our veterans. As you know, if you know Kelsey, I mean, she's a huge, huge advocate for veterans. If you kill the veterans, you don't have to pay their, their retirement fund. Like, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous what the government is doing. And really, it's just a symptom of a broken healthcare system.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to always be with these really, really pervasive things that it's like this really nice, compassionate language that disguises the fact that what they're doing is evil. I mean, you could take, gender affirming care, for example, as well. Like, I don't think, mutilating and chopping off body parts of a young woman or a man is compassionate. Like, I just don't, that's not what I see as compassion. And the same thing in this situation, like dying with dignity, like in an exception, I guess, when you started in 2016, like having a terminally ill thing, and that was the only people that could get this. Great. Now you might, because your family has time to say goodbye. There's all sorts of things that can happen. You can get the funeral in order and sign all these things. And then, yeah, okay, this is my choice. I'm good now. But now it's turned into something totally different. If I'm getting that right.
Yeah, you are getting it right. And I think it's really interesting because I am not fundamentally opposed to medical assistance in dying, right? Like, the idea of someone suffering to me is awful, and a lot of times people say, well, we don't let our animals suffer, so why should we let humans suffer? And so the idea of allowing someone to die peacefully according to their wishes, to me, seems like a really nice idea. But communism, in theory, is also a really good idea. So I'm going to tell you why medical assistance in dying is not actually a beautiful death like people think that it is. Palliative care done right allows a person to die a natural death with as little pain as possible. And when I was being filmed for a BBC documentary last year that's coming out hopefully this summer, Liz Carr, who is disabled, and she's also an actor in the UK. She said the problem with the Canadian system is that when you open up this door, you don't get to decide who walks through. Mm-hmm. And so this is what we're seeing, right? Because this door opened initially for people who were suffering terminally. Now it's for people who aren't suffering terminally. Now it's for people who are deaf or who have diabetes. And and then now it's going to be children up to the age of 12 and people with mental illness. And it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But the people that are accessing it, they don't want to suffer anymore. And what I've learned recently is that the actual process of MAID is not peaceful like people think it is to be. There was a doctor, Dr. Zivo, who actually spoke to the Senate in Canada when they were looking to do the expansion. So this is years ago, like this is 2021. And he was an anesthesiologist. And there was a specific drug that they use. There's 4 drugs that they use when a person is killed through medical assistance and dying. And one of them that's used in anesthetic was no longer becoming available. He didn't know what was happening to it. So he started researching and he found out that this drug was made in Italy. And in Italy, under the EU, they are not allowed to make drugs that are used for lethal injection. And in the States, where lethal injection is legal for prisoners, they were using this. And so this Italian company had stopped making it. So Dr. Zivo ended up going down this deep, dark rabbit hole and started researching. And he actually did the largest study on over 300 autopsies on prisoners who had received lethal injection. And what he found is that in 85% of these people, their lungs were double in weight and filled with fluid. And he wasn't there to argue whether or not MAID was right or wrong. But he said what people need to understand is that this peaceful death that they think that they are going to die is not. Because the first thing that you get injected with is a paralytic. So you can't scream. You can't tell anyone that you're in pain. And then they inject you with other medications that make your lungs fill up with fluid over a 10-minute period. And he said your death is akin to being waterboarded or drowning. It is a painful, horrible death, and nobody is talking about this. The Senate actually said to him, "Are you done?"
That was their response.
That was their response. And I can actually send you the copy of the Senate afterwards if you want to put this in the show notes so people can read this, because I am not making this up. My mom died a horrible, painful death. She thought she was going to die a peaceful death. She didn't want to suffer anymore because she had a brain injury from a minor car accident and she couldn't get help.
Yeah.
She was a psychiatric nurse prior to her accident, 18 months before her death. She worked in the community. She was a beautiful, amazing human being who devoted her entire life to helping people with mental illness. And when she needed help, our system failed her.
Yeah, could you walk us through, exactly what went down with your mom and basically what led you to this situation now?
So in February 2020, my mom was in a minor car accident. She was rear-ended. My daughter was 11 years old. She was in the car at the time. My daughter was fine. And immediately afterwards, my mom went to the doctor and she was diagnosed with a concussion at the time. Well, we know what happened in March of 2020. The world went into lockdown. I don't want to say the C word because we'll get blocked on all of the social media channels here in Canada because that's what happens because we're censored. That's a whole other thing that we could get into. I don't need to, but so the world went into lockdown and my mom wasn't able to access proper care. And so doctor appointments were over the phone for months on end. And my mom started experiencing classic symptoms of someone who has suffered a concussion. So sensitive to light, dizziness, nausea. And it progressively became worse and worse. She wasn't able to watch TV. She wasn't able to, look at screens really. And because she was so isolated in her home, nobody knew what was going on except for her common law partner that she was living with. What we now know is that my mom, it had triggered mental illness. She became extremely paranoid. We found journal entries. She thought she was going to be sniped if she left the house. The last 3 months, my sister and I started coming in on Sundays to help. So at this point, the doctors were testing her for everything under the sun. And this is how the Canadian system works, as opposed to going to a private clinic where they test you for everything and you get the results back. In Canada, they send you for a test. You wait months for the results. You get it back. Wasn't that. Next test. You wait a few months for a specialist. If you're lucky, sometimes 12 months to a year. You get to see them. They run more tests. They come back. It's negative. So they ruled out everything from cancer and parasites and HIV and everything, really. There was nothing wrong with my mom that they could figure out. And my sister and I, we wanted to have an intervention with her. Mom, we need to take you to the hospital. You need to get a feeding tube. If you're really not, absorbing any nutrients, we didn't believe this to be true. This is what she was telling us. If your body isn't absorbing nutrients, you need a feeding tube. Well, she started refusing treatment. And at this point, what we know now is that she was already in the process of applying for MAID. She had already rewritten her will. She was giving all of her belongings away. She was depressed. She had suicidal ideation. She wanted to die. She grew up in the church. She didn't believe in killing herself. But this is a loophole, because it's a medical procedure. It's not suicide. And it was so hard because, she was eating 6 kinds of foods. She was pureeing everything. She was calling a medical intuitive, which is a psychic, to see if her foods were safe to eat because she was so paranoid. She thought everything had heavy metals in it. She was energy testing everything. For someone that doesn't know what that is, she would hold on to food. And if her body naturally leaned forward, she would feel it was safe to eat. And if her body naturally fell backward, she felt it wasn't safe to eat. She was relying on, she was grasping at straws at this point because our healthcare system couldn't help her. And she wouldn't let us help her at this point. It went too far. She kept us in the dark for so long. And then the next thing we knew, we found out she had applied for medical assistance in dying and had been approved. And we had less than 48 hours before her scheduled appointment. And so my sister and I went to the courthouse. We pled for an emergency hearing. We were granted that. And with all of the information that we had, we were granted a warrant for the arrest for my mom under the Mental Health Act. And she was taken to the hospital for assessment. And the psychiatrist assessed my mom. And then I got to speak to the psychiatrist afterwards because I was the one that was granted the warrant. And he said to me, I found your mom to be sound of mind. And I said to him, if you find my mom to be sound of mind, she will die. And the blood will be on your hands. And he said, well, in Canada, I'm legislated to ask a certain number of questions. And if she passes, then she's found to be sound of mind. And I said to him, because this was during COVID on the phone. He worked with my mom in the hospital setting. And I said, if you could see my mom right now and you could see the state that she was in, there's no way that you would find her to be sound of mind. And I said, you know how smart my mom is. And she knows everything to say to pass this assessment, to be found sound of mind. Whatever I said to him struck a chord. And he said that my mom was sound of mind, but MAID could not continue until further assessment could be done because he didn't want that blood to be on his hands. And my mom was so devastated about that she slit her wrist.
So before that, he knew all the information you just stated to me about what she was doing in her house and all these things that were happening, and knew her previously and how professional and well she acted in that setting, and he still thought sound of mind. She's saying.
So, no. Yeah, yes and no. So okay. In Canada, with medical assistance in dying, it's a person has medical autonomy over their body, meaning they get to choose what they want to do with their body when it comes to medical treatment. I was not asked. No one close to her was asked. So he did the assessment. He asked the questions that you're legislated to ask. So you can go online and you can read about all of these things. Basically, here's a clock, like you can, like, literally you can go online, like, here's a clock, and like, do you know how to tell time, and do you know what year it is, and like all of these kind of things. This determines whether you are sound of mind. And the other thing he said to me, he said, if you don't like the legislation, then you need to change it. So, I mean, here I am now changing legislation. But when I got to speak to him, I told him all of these things, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter in Canada because my mom wanted to die. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. She was essentially starving herself to death. And because she was so emaciated and lying to the doctors about everything that was going on with her, that she was eating 2,000 calories a day, bullshit. She absolutely was not. All of these things, and no one's coming to the house to check it. In Canada, we have a MAID oversight unit. And within 72 hours of a person's death, there is a special unit to review all of the paper post-mortem.
So they've already passed away.
Already dead. So what happens if you find out that they fucked up?
Yeah.
I'll tell you what happens, because this is what happened with us. We asked for my mom's assessment records. They won't give them to us. My sister and I have spent over $40,000 retaining the top law firm in Canada to get my mom's assessment records from Fraser Health, the health authority that she was under, and they won't give them to me. And they have every right to, because I'm the executor of her estate. I have her full medical records that were given to me because I'm the executor and I have the right to them. And all I want to prove is whether my mom died lawfully, which is in her best interest. And Fraser Health says no, it's not in her best interest. It's a cover up. The government is covering this up. And this is what we presented to the police. And the police actually said, you're right. There is enough evidence to open up a case. And so they opened up a case, and it was the first investigation into a MAID death in Canada. And that's what got the media attention. That's what connected us with the disability advocates, with Kelsey, with everyone that, that we can. That's how we got to speak to the House of Commons. And this is how we're able to make change, because we're being loud about it. And the louder we are, the harder they fight back. And I'll tell you this much, in 30 years, when the privacy laws no longer protect my mom's rights, I'm getting those records if I can't get them before, and I am going to prove criminal negligence. And I hope those doctors are dead for their sake, because otherwise they are going to jail.
Yeah. I like your intensity. Fire me up about that.
Yes.
All right, let's circle back before I interrupted you. But okay, so the doctor says he doesn't want the blood on his hands, and then your mom goes back to her house and she slits her wrists. Right.
So at this point, she's now found to be not sound of mind.
So simply because she cut her own wrist, everything else being exactly the same.
This is how fucked up this is. If you apply for MAID because you want to die, that's reasonably acceptable. Well, not even reasonably. That is acceptable to the Canadian government, because you're just asking for a procedure. If you try to take your own life, you're crazy. And then they're going to lock you up for 48 hours, minimum hold, and then you have to be assessed again. So that's what happened to my mom. She slit her wrist. They found her to not be sound of mind, and they put her into the psychiatric ward that she used to manage. She used to be the head nurse of the psychiatric unit that she eventually was admitted to. And because of the conflict, they transferred her to another hospital that she also worked at. There was also conflict. And after 48 hours, they assessed her again. Of course, she passed because she used to do these assessments. Mm-hmm. She was released, and 4 hours later, she was dead. They went to her house and they killed her 4 hours after being released from a psychiatric unit. And my boyfriend got a text message from my mom's common law partner to tell him that my mom was dead. My boyfriend had to tell me that my mom was dead.
4 hours?
4 hours.
How does that happen so quickly?
You tell me. Nobody can answer this question for me. Do you
When
think
you've
that there's
talked
a
to,
reason they're not
yeah,
giving me these assessment records?
yeah,
Yeah.
holy shit.
Yeah.
But I want to know what the difference is between saying that you're going to take your own life and being put in the suicide or psych ward and going in and saying, I want MAID because of the same issue that's going on. So there is no difference, I guess. Yeah.
I don't think there is. And this, circles back to my point, is that people are accessing MAID out of desperation. It was meant to provide a dignified death. I mean, that's what they said.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing dignified about this. There's nothing dignified about it.
Wow.
It's money. The government saves millions and millions of dollars providing MAID versus palliative care. In 2021, it was $89.6 million that they saved. That's just palliative care. Okay. So now when you go into all of the people that they no longer have to treat because they have diabetes or they're depressed or they have multiple sclerosis or, on and on and on and on and on and on. The pensions that they don't have to pay to the veterans, the shelters that they don't have to pay for homeless people, disability pensions.
Yeah. I mean, that was going to be my next question. Like, what's the incentive? I mean, obviously you just answered it. It's all money.
It's always money.
Yeah. I guess that's basically what our society values over human life is money.
Yeah. It's an ableist society that we live in. If you are unable to financially contribute to the economy, you are seen as discardable.
As less than, as something you could throw away.
Yeah. That's how it is now.
Okay. So now, since you've been doing this, what strides, what steps, what have we done to move forward? Because I know a lot of work is happening. You've obviously moved back this bill till 2027, which is amazing. What other things are happening that maybe we can be optimistic about?
So, I mean, for us, I think it's triage, right? Obviously we would love to roll this back. And I think that it's naive to think that we'll ever get to the place where we're actually going to roll this bill back, where it's only people who are terminal that are able to access this. But I think that the next really important steps, the things that we're getting out there that are really important for people to know is just really the education behind it. So, elderly people that are being targeted in old folks' homes right now, they are now learning about MAID and that it's not a painless death. They're learning about better palliative care. And when they are in that position, that they know how to access these programs, that they know where the support is, they can reach out to people, they can talk to them. There are do not euthanize forms that you can now get online. So we're enabling people to protect themselves. People that are in vulnerable states are learning more about services that are available online. If you are suicidal, for example, you can go out and you can get help. And there's so many people that want to help you and care about you and love you. We are, I mean, when I say we, I'm just umbrellaing everyone who's working towards this, but the disability advocates are pushing for better services because now this is just shining a light on how people with disabilities are discarded and being thrown away and how, like recently they were just approved for a $6 a day increase. Like, what is that going to get you? Like, it's nothing. Like the amount that you have to survive on in Canada on a disability, on your disability fund, it's below the poverty line, and people aren't really understanding this. So I think I always look for the good in this. And because this is such an evil beast, people are now waking up and they're speaking up. So you can call in Canada. I mean, this doesn't apply for people in the States, but in Canada, we have we have ridings like you guys do. And so say, for example, there's like 3 cities and you're in a riding and there's a member of parliament. And that member of parliament is your voice who goes to speak to our House of Commons, which is kind of like our Senate. And it is their literal job to do what we tell them. And people forget this all the time. And so in Canada, if you don't support medical assistance in dying, call your MP and tell them that you're not going to vote for them if they support this. And they're going to lose their job, and they don't want to lose their job. So people think that one voice isn't going to be heard, and that's not true, because I'm one voice who says it to a louder voice, who says it to another voice, who says it to podcasters who have bigger voices, and it just keeps going on and on and on, and we get louder. And that's how change happens. And it is happening and it's working. So I think that's really positive. You know, for anyone who is like me or like you and you've lost someone to suicide, a lot of times I think you could just, I mean, and I did for a while, just go into this really dark place also, you know. And for anyone who is considering that or has been through and you've survived on the other side, know that, I mean, as much as I would do anything to have my mom back, I know that by doing this, every time I speak about her, she lives on, and I hopefully save other people's lives by doing it, you know. And that's something good that's come out of a really, really bad situation. There's always hope. There's always hope in all of it. And that's what we can do. I don't know. I don't know if that's like a big, you know, like there's no like great solution of something that we can do. But I think it's just that this message that everyone's voice, no matter how small you think it is important. And I'm proof that when we come together, that's when change, really good things can happen.
Yeah. I always had this fear about talking about my sister. Maybe you have the same one, that if I talk about it so much as I do, that I would just get like desensitized to the story. I would just regurgitate it in a way where it doesn't mean as much to me. And I've been in certain situations where I felt like, oh, you just sort of went through the motions with that story about your sister. And so I don't really have a point or a question, just sort of stating that that's sometimes how I felt. And so it can get that way when you're talking about something so often, especially with something you care about so deeply. But you still got to do it, because even the story where you share half-heartedly, or you're not as, you know, your best self, or whatever the case may be, you're still getting the point out that it's important to speak about these types of things. Like, the only way you talk about suicide is if you bring it out into the light. You have to. Like, it is a scary thing that lives in the darkness, but if we can bring it to the light, then more people are going to be saved. More people are going to understand what the conversation is, that they can overcome, they can adapt, they can evolve. There is hope, there is change, there is people who've been in the trenches and pulled themselves out of it. You know, there's also a ton of fatigue that comes with talking about this, you know, over and over and over again. And maybe you've experienced some of that emotion as well.
Yeah, I think it's survival, you know, because when you've lost someone in a traumatic way, your life becomes two. There was before and after.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the only way to survive sometimes in the after, at least initially in the beginning, in the acute stages of it, you do have to compartmentalize and put things into silos. And when after my mom passed away, I wasn't diagnosed initially, but I was eventually diagnosed with PTSD, and it was so horrific that I couldn't even talk about it with anyone. And it's important for me to talk about these things now because, you know, I have gone through ketamine therapy and I do microdose psilocybin and I do traditional talk therapy regularly. And it's through all of these things that have allowed me to heal and to talk about it. You know, after doing the ketamine therapy, I don't have flashbacks anymore, you know, and knowing it was such a dark place that there was sometimes like I was driving along and I just thought, man, if my car went off the road right now and this all ended, that'd be kind of nice, you know, and I didn't want to die. It was the same,
Right.
you know, but it just hurt so bad and you couldn't talk about it. I was standing in my bedroom when I was told that my mom was dead, and the spot where I was standing was like an energy vortex. Like I would walk into my room sometimes and I would almost collapse on the spot. You know, I couldn't talk about that. I'd be having a hot tub with my partner and all of a sudden my mom's dead frozen face would flash in front of my eyes and I'd become paralyzed and I wouldn't be able to speak. And he didn't even know that was happening.
Hmm.
And so no matter how dark these things can get, I think the reason I don't stop talking about it, even though you suffer that fatigue that you're saying, you know, by talking about it, is that I've come out on the other side of it and I no longer have flashbacks. And I was put on anti-anxiety meds and antidepressants after my mom died, and I'm not on them anymore. And it was a relatively short turnaround, less than 2 years, that I was able to go through that whole process. And, you know, I'm fortunate enough to be able to afford to do that because it's private. You know, you have to
Right.
pay for that stuff privately. It wasn't cheap to do it. Um, but what it taught me is that there's beauty in trauma, because the person that I am now because of the trauma is a much more empathetic person. And I'm curious about other people and how they're living and what I can do to help. And I can't imagine now being the person that I was before. And so it really is all just beautiful. And that's the reason why we're here and why we're human, is to experience the good and the bad, you know, the making love and experiencing horrible death is all part of being human. Like, isn't it all just beautiful? We're so lucky to be here. And I really just want to share that message with people, is that we all are worth living. And whether, you know, MAID aside, you know, put that out of here, like we're all just humans and we just need to love each other more.
Yeah.
That's my hippie speech.
I fucking love it. I feel the exact same way. Yeah. Yeah. I never pictured my life being in this. You know, when my sister passed away, I was a professional wrestler. And that's a pretty strange job to have that whole turnaround in 6 years. And now basically all I do is talk about mental health and, you know, positivity and all these sorts of things. But it had to come out of, you know, all sorts of pain, like you're talking about. And life can get amazing. You know, you have beautiful children. I'm assuming, you know, a supportive partner and all these sorts of things. That's probably why you were able to get to the other side maybe faster than in other people. And I have the same. My parents are fucking incredible. Like, no family really, like two parents staying together after having to bury their own child is fucking
Rare.
crazy. Right.
Yeah.
And we're still doing it, you know, day by day, we're taking it, you know. I'm getting married in September. Right. So there's just like things to look forward to that are still absolutely amazing. And what I've also learned in this journey is that, you know, two emotions can exist at the same time. And that's part of experiencing the totality of it all. On my wedding day, I swear I'm going to be fucking so happy. But I'm also going to think, man, I wish my sister was here.
Totally.
But that's okay. That's okay. Yeah. And I'm good with that. Not like, yeah, good with that. But like, I've accepted that fact that that's going to be part of the rest of my life. When I have a kid, man, my sister would be great with this kid right now. But man, she's here. She's guiding me. She's my spirit. She's got me going on. Let's go. Let's do it. Be the best dad you can be. And those things all come together through, yes, the down, but you come out the other side with this new look on life. And if we can get to a point where we just, all we do is value human life above everything else, then sort of all this other stuff can go away through the work, and obviously all the stuff that you're doing will make that a reality. But first, the initial thing, the foundational layer has to be that your life fucking matters. And it really, really, really does, because there will never be another you, whoever's listening or watching. You're the only you that's ever going to exist. And that's the most powerful thing that we have. And so we have to teach our kids that. We have to teach young people that. We have to teach them that they can be resilient. They can. Like, there's this thing about like everything has to be safe and cushy all the time. Like, that's just not how anything works ever. Like, I mean, I'm sure you're teaching your kids that, and like, you have to be able to bounce back and be resilient. You also have the people that you need to lean on and support and talk to about it. But it's ultimately up to you to make that decision to continue to keep going and growing from all the stuff that you go through. And that's extremely important.
Yeah. And for me, like on a spiritual level, I think the reason we come here is to experience, the negative. You think about the other side, or whatever you want to call it, part of the quantum field or heaven, or, like, religion aside, if you believe in a higher power, I think there's this connectiveness. Like, we all know that we come here to experience what it is to be in a human body, and kind of like what I was talking about, the growth and the lessons that we learn come through the hardships. And that's the whole point of being here. And so if we try to avoid that, or try to cushion our lives so we don't experience it, then there's no growth. And if you can learn to, I don't know the best way to explain it, but kind of how you were talking about your sister, learning to embrace all of that as well. Of course, you would do anything to have her here physically. But now that she's not here, now that my mom's not here, doesn't mean that I don't have a relationship with her anymore. I feel like I know my mom maybe more now than I did before. I'm actually writing a book right now, a memoir for her, and I'm interviewing people, and I'm reading her journals and her medical records. And man, you learn a lot about someone from their medical records, and I'm learning that my mom was a real human being, and I talk to her all the time. I swear at her all the time. I think if you've been through trauma, you understand the dark humor side of things, but we're always just like, fucking Donna, like, leaving us here in this bullshit, like, we just, you be mad. I'm still mad at her all the time, what the hell? And like, I hear her talk back to me, and, smile and laugh, and I still have her with me, and so that's, I could talk about the medical assistants and dying and stuff. But when I talk about her, that's when it gets me. Because you miss them. You'll never not. You'll never not.
Yeah. No. And I don't ever want to get to a place where I don't miss her.
Totally.
Because there's early days on, when I had days where I was like really happy or had a great day, or I didn't think about her, I would lay in my bed at night and I would feel like an absolute piece of shit. What the fuck is wrong with you, Aaron? Why don't you think about your sister? She was in pain and you think you can have a good fucking day? What's wrong with you?
Survivors.
You have to go through that. And now when I have a good day, I'm like, yeah, I had a great day. My sister would have loved this day too. Cheers. She's smiling down, and it takes a while to learn those lessons. Like, my sister was the most non-judgmental, loving, open-hearted person you could ever meet. I was the opposite when she was alive. And now I'm that way based on just thinking about her life and how she treated people and the lessons she tried to teach me as a big sister. Now I'm trying to adopt those things and live that and through her. And so it's a very special thing to have that. So
yeah, I love that. That's very nice. What was her name?
Rachel.
Wow.
Yeah.
Rachel was lucky to have you.
Thank you. And I was lucky to have her. And cheers to her, and cheers to your mom, and all the people that we will remember and live on forever. So
cheers to them.
Yeah. Any last minute closing thoughts you definitely want people to understand? I know we covered a lot in the last 50 minutes, but any last bit?
Oh, well, yeah, I think we kind of covered all of the major bases. I mean, I'm sure you'll link all of this in the show notes as well, but if anyone wants to follow along my journey, you can do that. I'm on Instagram. You can sign up for my newsletter. I have a book that's hopefully coming out later on this year if I can get through the editing process quick enough. If not, early next year. And if you want to help with the advocacy work, we've got a website where you can go learn more. You can listen to media articles, documentaries that we've been on. Rebel News is dropping a documentary. I don't think in Canada we can see it again because of our cool censorship, but down in States, you guys will be able to watch it. I think it's going to be available on Amazon. But if you go to Rebel News online, it drops May 21st, and there's going to be screenings around Alberta and BC in person. So if anyone wants to come out, you can get tickets for that now. And just want to give everyone a big hug. That's all. I think the biggest thing in life is just be a little more compassionate. You never have any, you never know what someone is going through. Yeah.
100%. Well, thank you for being you. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you very much.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate you too. Everything you're doing.
Thank you very much for tuning into that episode. And if you enjoyed it, click right here for another full-length episode of the podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe. But most importantly, above all else, please take good care of yourselves and others. And I'll see you next time. Lots of love. Cheers.